Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. First off, just want to say that I'm almost finished up with school, and so, that'll kind of give me a little more time to actually post some stuff on my Instagram and YouTube, and everything is going well because I'm passing all my classes. So, give a big round of applause to Papa Afro. He's worked countless hours and many sleepless nights to get there. So, with all that being said, I'm not going to make a long intro aside because honestly, today is actually a really unique and really special video. I know I say that about all my videos, but this one is actually something new, something different, something that's completely out of the realm of things that we are used to, right? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about something that isn't even like connected, to the Great War Saga or even Chronicle Legend or even D.A.D. And looking back on it, I realized I haven't really made a lot of videos focusing on the D.A.D universe. It's been mostly Chronicle and Legend, but there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that is because, I want to kind of do it in a chronological sense to where, it kind of goes down to all the characters I've made. And sure, I started off with the Legend universe, and the Legend universe has a lot more assorted characters and a lot more unique stories compared to Chronicle. Not to say that both stories or like both universes are like, not to say that one universe is better than the other, but basically I have it structured to where I focus on the Legend universe first because there's a lot more uniqueness and variety when it comes to there as compared to Chronicle, which in a technical sense I've already made some Chronicle videos. If you want to look at my playlists and whatnot, I already have like First President Jack Flowers, First Lady, Metahuman David Washington, Alva. So I already have some videos on Chronicle characters. It's just that they were more present in the Great War Saga, blah, blah, blah. I'm getting off topic. Basically, in this video today, we're not going to be looking at any characters or anything that is related to both Chronicle, Legend, or D.A.D. Instead, I have some good news. I came up with another universe. That's right. These little gears that go inside my brain, the electrons that zap from one to another, has popped out a brand new universe for me to share with y'all today. And so basically in this universe, it has nothing to do with superheroes. It has nothing to do with it has something to do with superpowered beings, but there's no like Xerxians, there's no Jorians, there's no there's no elementals, there's no Cinderella Man. This has nothing to do with the Chronicle Legend D.A.D. It has no stars in it, or maybe it does. Not to say that stars are a cosmic being, a cosmic force of nature, so they could be anywhere, they could be nowhere. Who knows? I'll keep that a top T secret. You know what I'm saying? But in this universe, we're going to be focusing something I like to call the Audacity comics universe. Now, y'all must be thinking to yourselves, Afro, what the heck? Why chose Audacity? And so the reason for this is because when you look at it in the sense how I want things to be structured is that there's something for like adults, right? So in the sense of me, how I have it is that I have the D.A.D, the Legend, and the Chronicle universe that's more adult focused. Not to say that it's like, you're going to be seeing like big, like it, how, okay, collect your thoughts, Smith. Basically, the Chronicle and Legend and D.A.D universes are meant for more mature audiences, more like it focuses on a lot more heavier topics and focuses a lot more on, action and whatnot, and it's a lot more adult. There's a lot more curse words, a lot more blood spilled, as you could tell from my other videos and whatnot. So it's a lot more oriented to adults and college, I guess you could say. And with another universe, I'm going to be making a video on sometime soon. I'm not going to go into much of that about it, but basically that one's for more or less like kids and families and whatnot. Still has like action-packed characters and deep moments to where you can understand the characters and they're not just bright colors on the screen and whatnot, but it's a little more family focused. There's a lot more cutesy characters, a lot more color in there, I guess you could say. Excuse me, but in this universe, this one's focused more on like the teen demographic, the young teen demographic, I guess you could say, or even, you can add the college kids into there too. So obviously this isn't made for kids, but it's also like still kind of has that edge where adults are like, okay, what the, they don't want anything to do with that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I have it structured. And the reason why I chose Audacity is because when you think of kids, or think of like teenagers and whatnot, they're a lot more bold, a lot more brash. They have the audacity to do things, right? And also, audacity just sounds pretty cool. So, you know, there's another idea in the tank. The Chronicle, the Legend, Demons and Deities, and Audacity. So there's already 4 universes right there. Well, technically 5 because I have the other one that's cooking in the oven right now. But going off topic, what is the Audacity universe? Now, the Audacity universe is, as I mentioned, a lot more unique because, in a sense, it doesn't really focus on, like, it has superpowered beings, but they're not wearing spandex costumes or fighting bad guys or anything. But, in a weird sense, this focuses more on like horror centric, a lot more like cosmic horror, like science fiction, supernatural fantasy horror. So, let's kind of take a step back and, reevaluate like what's going on here. So, obviously in this universe, it makes up 3 categories. There are 3 stories that make up this universe and whatnot. And I've already go a couple months back, I kind of already mentioned this in my miscellaneous video, basically kind of going over like hard hat hardware and Slasher Dome. But the thing was is that, 1, I didn't have a name for that universe at that time, and 2, I didn't have the 3rd story that I'm going to be talking about in this video today. So let's kind of go back over those 2 and kind of focus on like what those 2 are about. Now, sure, I kind of went over like a nice light foundation about what it's going to be, but let me just kind of go a little more in depth with it. Again, still kind of writing some things out, but it'll kind of give you all more of a idea and understanding about what makes up this universe and what themes and ideas are going to be presented in this video, or not this video, but in this story, but it's also going to be presented in the next story. So basically in this story, let's focus, let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, take a virus, so she hollers, let her go, eeny, meeny, miny, Slasher Dome. All right, so let's focus on Slasher Dome. Now, Slasher Dome is actually really interesting because they were actually the first idea I came up with this universe, right? So the idea of basically super like natural horror, like slasher villains and whatnot fighting in this big tournament. Obviously that's not like a grand like, oh my god, this is going to make billions idea, but it's an idea that's really unique to me. But obviously I can't really use Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger or the Candyman and whatnot, right? So I just opted to decide to make my own characters. That's right. I basically made my own OCs, horror slasher OCs and whatnot, right? So, I mean, in technical sense, all my characters are OCs, but we're not going to get into that. But basically, in this universe, we focus on 2 main characters, Lucille Robital, or Lucy Robital, and Jacob Varners. Obviously, with that name, it's Jason Voorhees, but it's my Jason Voorhees, so piss off. And he's different enough to where he's not like a exact 1-to-1 direct copy, but there's still elements and ideas there. Big guy in a scary hockey mask with a sharp weapon that kills horny teenagers and whatnot, right? So, that's the idea that's there. But the way it makes him different is that he leans more into the hockey aesthetic. He's literally a giant hockey player, but instead of like, a hockey stick and whatnot, it's actually a scythe that's bent like a hockey stick. So it's actually, it's pretty cool and whatnot. And also he controls ice. So, he's pretty, oh, I'm bad for this one. He's pretty cool. Yes, oh, that's corny, but basically, he's pretty cool, and he's a very unique character in a sense of like, in a technical sense, he's kind of like my version of Frankenstein. Not in the sense of like he's made up of multiple hockey players to make this guy up. That was the original idea, but I decided, nah, it's a bit too bold. So I just kind of made him like one singular dude who basically got into a hockey accident. He was kind of like, he was the big guy on the team, but everyone hated him because he was just that good at hockey and whatnot. And, he was about to go to college and help out his mom. They were basically a poor family and whatnot. I'm not going to go in depth of all the characters' backstories because one, I'm still writing it out, and two, there's a lot of like spoilers in there to where it like reveals the twist and whatnot. So basically, Jacob Varner's, there's a big accident. He falls in the water. He dies of hypothermia. It's sad, sad days. But then he comes back as a vengeful like zombie, so kind of like Jason. But that's kind of his story, and he has like mama issues because he feels like he let down his mom because his mom, let's just say, was kissed by all his colleagues, and then they killed her, and it's a heavier story for him. But we're not gonna, that's his story. That's all you need to know. Lucille is a very unique character because she basically is a black girl but has the goth aesthetic. I adore the goth aesthetic. Like I remember back when I was a little wee tiny puffball, I remember like watching Chucky with my siblings and like just watching like horror movies and watching my older sister. I don't think she technically had a goth phase, but she very much had a phase where she was obsessed with horror movies and like the supernatural and whatnot. Mimi, if you're watching this video, first of all, hi. How's my little monkey man doing? But it just kind of reminds me back of the good old days of like the early 2000s, like, punk goth aesthetic. And I really like that. So I kind of made her have that sort of aesthetic because it's kind of unique. You don't really see a lot of like, you don't really see that anymore. And if you do, it's basically a bunch of posers and whatnot, right? They don't have that grit. They don't have that angst that us early 2000s kids had. They don't know none about that. No, none about that. About the roll tide in here. So basically, that's kind of what she looks like and whatnot. Obviously, I'm going to have these pictures posted. The only problem is that I kind of got started on the hardware picture, but I didn't finish it. So it's going to be like a nice little progress. You guys actually get to see like something that's in progress, and then when I post the updated picture, it's going to be a little different. Who knows, maybe some changes here and there. You guys can compare and contrast. And I'm getting off topic again. But with Lucille, her story is that her family was voodoo practitioners and whatnot. They come from Creole. There's a lot of Creole aesthetics that go into there and whatnot. And, it focuses a lot more on the voodoo magic side of things. So, she basically has this book. I need to come up with the name of the book because I have it like stage name as like the Necronomicon basically, but can't really use that because that's the Evil Dead. But basically she uses the Necronomicon to kind of wish to meet her idol, and her idol is Jacob Varner's, and that basically teleports her to basically the what did I call it? The end. Basically it's called the end, and in the end is kind of where the dreams of like all these horror movie monsters and cosmic horror beings kind of grow and flourish and whatnot. Because I remembered, I don't know if I mentioned this back in my last miscellaneous video, but I basically talked about how my father gave me the idea of that I'm grabbing these ideas from like different places and whatnot. So I decided to bring that idea to life to where these things kind of manifest into another plane of existence because of our own ideas and whatnot. And that idea was known as the end. So basically, when it's all said and done, they meet up with all these other horror movie monsters that are, my OCs, but they definitely take elements from like other classic horror movie monsters and whatnot. You got the creature from the Black Lagoon, you got vampires, you got mummies, zombies, blah, 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 but they do meet up with the main villain of the story. His name is Thaddeus Strange, or Tad Strange, I guess you could say, right? So he is my version of Freddy Krueger. He basically is a dream demon that haunts your nightmares, blah, blah, blah. But, he's kind of, wanting to get the Necronomicon from Lucille to kind of go back to the real world to actually, like, take over it and whatnot, right? So that's kind of his story. And then they also meet up with Axel Butcher. Axel Butcher is actually a rival of Jacob of Jacob Varner's, because they're so close when it comes to their kill count or the body count and whatnot, that Axel sees Jacob as like a rival, or I guess you could say like competition and whatnot, right? So it's a fight for the apex serial killer and whatnot. So that's kind of the main idea, not main idea, the main characters that we're going to be focusing on in this story. And there's going to be a couple other characters that go in and go out and blah, blah, blah. But the reason why these characters are doing this is because they're going after this thing called the singularity. And the singularity is basically a, like, ball of constructed power and cosmic, to where if whoever wins the slasher dome is allowed to have the singularity, and the singularity grants whatever wish you want, whatever, like the biggest chocolate bar in the world or the baddest bitches on your dick, like whatever you want, it can grant that to you. No monkey paw curls or anything. No genie like I wish to jump high and he turns you into a frog, right? No, there's none of that. Whatever specific wish you have, it can grant it. So that's kind of what Tad Strange is after as well. So he's basically going to go after it to not only gain more power, but also to get the book from Lucille to go back to the main, universe and whatnot, right? So that's kind of what I have so far. Obviously, there's going to be fights. There's going to be, like, stakes. There's going to be villains, or, there's going to be cosmic horror that's involved and whatnot, right? So, that's kind of what I have for Slasher Dome, which I may have already basically explained this back in my miscellaneous video, but I kind of want to just clear things up that I'm still writing things out. And, I may post another video that basically explains all of Slasher Dome, like I'm going to do it for the Jailbirds and the Rising Renegades and, blah, blah, blah. Now, the thing is that when it comes to this universe, I don't, when it comes to Audacity Comics, I don't think I'll have, like, a creating a champion video, because with these characters, they're not necessarily heroes. They're just like the main protagonists, which you can like say it's like champions and whatnot, but they're not like superheroes or anything. I may come up with a different name when it comes to this specific universe as a whole. And I may also do it for the other universe I'm going to be working on, because in a technical sense, I mean, they are like our heroes and our like protagonists and whatnot, but they're not like, they're people. They're flawed and whatnot. They have, anywho, I'm going off topic again, but basically, that's kind of what makes up the Slasher Dome story and whatnot. So let's focus now on Hard Hat Hardware. Now, as I mentioned before, I've already talked about this story in my miscellaneous video, but I didn't really go in depth. Again, I kind of just gave the basic foundation and the basic idea of what is going to make up this story. But in this story, it focuses on a journalist named what did I give his name? His name was Lombardi. Oh, what was his first name? Here, we'll just call him Lombardi. So Lombardi is basically a journalist that now in this story is actually really unique, because it actually is in some sort of like post-apocalyptic, but still kind of like it's rebuilding itself, but it's still very much like broken and whatnot, I guess you could say. Like very much Mad Max meets with Cyberpunk, where it's in the future, but it very much is like everyone for themselves and whatnot, right? So Lombardi is basically a reporter and like an investigator for some big company. I'm still gonna think of a name for that. But, he basically gets captured by the Hard Hat Hardware gang, who are, get this, they work in a hardware store and whatnot. But in this hardware store, these people have unique and special superpowers. I know I just said that there's no superheroes, but they have, unique abilities. They have superpowers and whatnot, but they're not superheroes or anything. So, you meet all these new wacky characters. You meet this character named Boomhauer, who's basically a guy who can explode and like use explosions in combat and whatnot. There's another character named Vinny, who's basically this giant, like hulking, like I don't know how or what species you would call him, because I'm not trying to make him any, like, I'm not trying to make him a dog or like a dinosaur or anything, but he has like a snout, like he's basically more like a primal human, but he's very much like a big lumbering, like, brute. But he has a soft kind heart, and he's basically Boomhauer's like adopted brother, because he saved Vinny's family and Vinny from like an attack of some sorts. Again, I'm still kind of writing it out. But, you also meet this character named Yorch, who basically is the sniper of the team. And he doesn't really have any, like, superpowers, but he very much is a skilled, like combatant and like gunslinger and whatnot, right? He has a sniper rifle, and he's a really good shot. And the main head honcho of the Hard Hat Hardware is actually, what was her name? Ah, shucks. I had her name. Here, we'll just call her Sue. We'll call her Sue. So Sue is basically she's basically the boss of the Hard Hat Hardware, and she's not really human or like, I like to call them unhumans. So they're not metahumans, but they're unhumans and whatnot, right? Because they're technically, in a sense, they were made in a factory, if that makes any sense. So they're not born with their powers, they were kind of just made with them and whatnot. So these unhumans, she's not one of them. She's actually an alien that goes by the name of Manager. So she's part of this alien race known as the Managers, and basically the Managers are kind of like these, like, this alien race that conquers galaxies and whatnot, and manages them and makes sure that they follow the Manager, like, code of conduct. So excuse me, basically, the Managers take over the planet. Again, still kind of writing out her story as well, but she is connected to Boomhauer, because Boomhauer, funnily enough, I will say this, is a clone. So he's not really the original Boomhauer. In fact, his original name isn't even Boomhauer. It was, I'm not going to spoil it, but he was basically a scientist that worked with Sue when they came to Earth and whatnot. But he created this thing known as Project Phoenix, which is, get this, have a bunch of like clone bodies of himself, and Boomhauer was one of those clones. There's also another character that is another clone of this scientist. I don't have a name for him yet, but he basically can control ice and whatnot, and that's explained because the one of the Boomhauer clones ended up in Antarctica, and instead of having an explosive like ability, he has the ability to control ice and whatnot. So he basically absorbed the ice around him, and that's kind of what gave him the cryogenic ability. So basically, Sue and the rest of the gang, and there's a couple of other characters that are going to be present in there, but they're not going to have that big of a role, and I still need the idea of like what their names are and what they're going to do in the story. The thing is that not all the characters are going to like survive, so don't get attached to any of these characters and whatnot. So that's kind of the idea of what I have for Hard Hat Hardware, and the main antagonist for that one is another manager. Her name is Dreamcatcher. So kind of getting wild with the names and whatnot, because you have Sue and then you have Dreamcatcher, which is it's just really funny. But it's my universe. It's my characters. I do what I want with their names. But yeah, they her. For Dreamcatcher, hers is basically to have control over the planet and whatnot. Now, the funny thing about Earth is that Earth is basically destroyed, if that makes any sense. Like, it's basically gone to ruin, but the Managers have kept it to where each continent is still like functional and is still able to kind of like move around, if that makes any sense. Like, it will definitely like make a lot more sense when I draw it out. But basically, the planet's exploded, but it's still kind of kept in the Earth shape, and basically everything is still kind of functional. It's just that it's destroyed, but it still works. You know what I'm saying? It's like a depressed teenager after listening to Fall Out Boy. It's sad, but it still has to work. You know what I'm saying? So again, it'll make a lot more sense when I draw it out. But that's kind of the idea what I have for Hard Hat Hardware, and again, if I had to say out of all these, this is probably the least developed because, I would say like all these are not really as developed compared to Chronicle Legend, D.A.D, blah, 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 because I had more time to spend with them and, I have to kind of focus on them a little more than I do have to focus on these other two that I'm working on. But, I feel like there's at least a foundation to where I can build off of it and kind of grow these characters and see where they go and whatnot. So, that's Hard Hat Hardware, and that's Slasher Dome. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is where I would cut the video off. However, as I mentioned a couple of minutes back, I have a third story that's a part of the Audacity comics. Now, this third story, I would say, has a lot more juicy elements to it because compared to the other two, there's a lot more twists, a lot more turns, a lot more heartbreak and whatnot, right? So, in this story, it focuses on, here, let me give you the name. It's the RSPD, or the Restless Souls Police Department. Now, in this story, it basically focuses on a character named, what was it? Was it Emmanuel or was it Manuel? Was it Eduardo? I really need to start writing these things down because I thought it was Emmanuel, but I don't know if I gave that name to him or his father. No, his father was Emmanuel and whatnot, right? So Emmanuel was his father. We focus on the character named Sebastian. Sebastian is a Spanish Freemason who is also a police officer and whatnot. So him and his police force are investigating a cartel that opens up a portal to this limbo purgatory, and so he basically falls through. And at this point in time, he thought his father had died because his mom was the only one who raised him, and his mom proclaimed such great stories to him about how his father was a great cop, and that with all the corruption that was happening down in Mexico, his father stayed true with his morals and was a good man. So they assume that he died due to the cartel, and that's what makes Sebastian want to take the cartel down. But it turns out that his father is actually alive in a technical sense, is that his father also fell through the portal as well, but came in contact and billed the RSPD, or the Restless Souls Police Department. So funnily enough, the cartel that I mentioned before is working with Restless Souls. And, I'm still writing things out, but basically the cartel is working with these Restless Souls to kind of get their lives back to the real world and whatnot, right? So that's happening. And then you also meet these other characters who are fighting to get this thing known as the symbol. The symbol is basically kind of similar to I literally just said it's singularity. Oh my god, I have these written down, but I have so much on my mind. Anywho, the singularity, it's the symbol is known as is similar to the singularity, where it grants one wish and whatnot, right? So that one wish, there's three other beings that are going after it, and these three beings are also going to be part of the main cast and whatnot. So let's talk about the first one. Her name is Josephine, or Josie Graves. Josie Graves was a cowboy that existed back in the 1800s and whatnot, and she was a really good sheriff. She went after this gang known as the Blackheads, and obviously put your pimples at jokes down in the comments below, but she was going after blackheads and whatnot, the Blackhead gang. And when she was younger, she had a brother who was kidnapped by a Blackhead gang member, and she vowed to take vengeance on the Blackhead gang. But basically there was one bank robbing incident where she basically killed all the Blackhead gang members, but there was one who, instead of fighting back, just dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Obviously this kind of sent off a couple of sparks in Josephine's head, because she's fought against the Blackhead gang for so long that this action of theirs, or this one member, is weird and thought it was out of the ordinary. So she shot the Blackhead gang member. But as she investigated more, she took off the mask of the of that one specific Blackhead gang member, and it turned out it was her brother. So she used the gun that she vowed to protect other civilians in the town. She used it to kill her own brother. So with the guilt weighing on her, she how to say this without YouTube? She So she game ended herself, I guess you could say. And, that's kind of what brought her to this limbo, because technically, in a sense, her job is not finished. Again, still kind of writing it out, how that would make sense. But let's focus on the other character, and her name is Penelope Pipsqueak, or Penny Pipsqueak, I guess you could say. Penny's story is that she was actually a British gang member who was a part of this gang, as so kind of going from law against crime. So there's that right there. But she basically fell into this experimental ink known as the black ink. The black ink kind of turned her into this rubber hose, like cartoon character, obviously kind of bending it to the like comic wise and whatnot, right? So she basically comes out as this cartoony jester, and that's where she got her name Penny Pipsqueak, is that when she came out, she was more of this tiny doll version of herself. Like, it mutated her into this weird cartoon character and whatnot, right? But with her tiny doll form, she can also like extend her limbs and be more of an attack form and whatnot. And basically, she has the same powers as Caboose, where she can like stretch her limbs like rubber and whatnot, and so she can constrict her opponents, attack opponents from far away and whatnot. But she also has this axe known as kindness. So there's the joke right there, where it's kill him with kindness, kindness, the axe and whatnot, right? So that's kind of where, she started off. But on one night of like crime, villainy and whatnot, her boss, which she had like, she had a thing for, she was basically the Harley Quinn of that time. And, I'm not going to reveal the name of the character or not going to reveal the name of her Joker, but, because that's going to play in a much bigger twist that's going to happen later on. But basically, while she was doing some crime, or not crime, but while she was doing some like inventory and like, making sure the money was in line, she was basically shot through the heart. And so she was left to die like in an alleyway. And so that's kind of her story and whatnot. And so that's how she ended up as another restless soul. Again, still kind of like ironing some things out and whatnot. And also, when I get done explaining the lamb's backstory, it's I'm going to connect it to another story, but let me finish up with the lamb. The lamb, we don't know anything about the lamb. The lamb doesn't know anything about the lamb. The lamb is the lamb. We don't know. He's a big mountain guy. He's a giant, big, bulky figure who, wears a lamb mask. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he is. All he remembers is that he woke up in this purgatory limbo world. He doesn't know anything about nothing. He always has this slight headache on his, I'm trying to think, on his left side. Left side, yeah. He always has this like stinging headache on his left side, and he, like, every time he sees the symbol, there's something that just irks at him. There's something that just pierces in his mind, that symbol looks familiar, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't know how. So that's basically the story of the lamb, is that we don't know anything about the lamb. The lamb doesn't know anything about the lamb. The lamb is that, just the lamb. He is the lamb. So basically, how I'm going to connect all this is that I kind of took an idea from, the Wizard of Oz and whatnot. So there's, the mindless lamb, because he doesn't remember anything and he doesn't even know who he is. Then you have the heartless jester, who was shot through the heart by her love and who betrayed her and whatnot. And then you have the cowardly sheriff. Now, the funny thing is about the cowardly sheriff, or Josephine and whatnot, is that when she used her gun on like herself and her brother, she vowed to never use that gun again. So when she landed in the purgatory world, her gun came with her, but she vows to never use it, and instead she attacks with her like lasso and like throwing knives and whatnot. So she still has offense capabilities, but she doesn't use her gun. In fact, every time that she like touches her gun, it almost acts like it burns her and whatnot, right? So that kind of where I get the idea of like the Wizard of Oz. There's the mindless lamb, the heartless jester, and the cowardly sheriff. So that's pretty cool and whatnot, right? So kind of mixed match. I thought I cooked with that one, right? So obviously the main antagonist that we're going to be focused on is his name is the Marked One. Now, again, we don't know anything about the Marked One. The Marked One knows everything about these characters, but he, remains anonymous and whatnot, right? So I'm not gonna, there's something itching at me to really just kind of spoil it here, but there's just like, here, you know what? I will say this is that, look at it to where how I mentioned before when it comes to Lamb. The Lamb doesn't remember anything, but he has connections with the Marked One. The Marked One has been there all. He has seen everything. It's almost like he's ageless. He's immortal. Like how does that happen? No one can just be immortal and whatnot. And he knew the Lamb, and when Lamb arrived in the purgatory, like limbo, like world, he was the only one there. There was no one else there. There was no other creature. There was no other being. It was just him by himself. Now, of course, as time went on, there's a lot more things being added to it, and a lot more monuments, and a lot more people coming down, and restless souls and whatnot. But for a time being, it was just him. So, I'm just gonna leave that there because, should I? No, I shouldn't spoil it because, my thing is that I took, when it comes to the Lamb and the Marked One, I myself am a Christian, so I took a lot from the Bible, and I really thought there's this one story that just really connects and resonates with me, and I thought that this would just be really good, to add as like a narrative structure when it comes to these two characters and their relationship. So, if you know, and if you know, leave it down in the comments below. I'm not going to say anything, but, nice little engagement and whatnot, right? But that's kind of what I have in this video today. Again, it's not really going to be a long one, I say, as we're almost reaching about 40 minutes, but, still about 36 and whatnot, right? So, that's kind of what I wanted to share today, is that I kind of had this idea in my head, and, something to kind of break up the Create a Champions video, because not to say that I'm getting sick and tired of it, but like looking at my YouTube channel, there's like, welcome to my world, part 1 through like 4, and then it's like, the first ever video was building a bastard, and then it was like creating a champion, creating a champion, creating a champion, then building a bastard, then creating a champion, creating a champion. So, I didn't want my video, and there was like a miscellaneous video in there somewhere. So, I kind of wanted to break up that video, and, I don't know what to title this video or how I'm going to go about it, but I will say that this is a good, like, at least breaking point when it comes to actually, I'm just taking a break for the, creating a champions video to kind of add a lot more unique and diversity to my like content and whatnot. But with all that being said, I am so happy to how this video turned out, and I'm kind of glad to where I at least have a structural foundation to where you guys can work off, to where when I do explain these videos or explain these characters and their stories and whatnot, you can go back to this video and see like what the heck this is about. So with all that being said, I am so thankful for all you guys watching today, and I am so happy to how everything is turning out. Life's going good, family is going great. But with all that being said, I have been AfroMandias. Thank you all so much for watching, and stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes. I'll catch y'all next time.